I was at the gym this morning. We're having a little bit of a workout, and then James came up and one of the members and said he watched the podcast, Economy Made Simple, where we did the explainer on the government finances. And it's only 10 minutes, but what we tried to do was just give you a bit of a feel for what are the big levers, the fact that we earn taxes to be able to pay for our operating expenses, and that the borrowing should really be for investments, except for very exceptional circumstances. So yeah, if you're interested in the podcast, give it a listen. And there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment. There's also a couple of other things going on at the moment with what's going on with the on and off again tariffs in the US. You'd have seen that Trump has again threatened new tariffs on Europe. So the world remains a bit uncertain. Okay, so it's 31 past. I think we can slowly make a start. I'll quickly share some slides with just my views on the budget and the changes in the KiwiSaver, and then we'll open it up for questions to our members. We've already got a couple of questions that have come in via email, so we'll pick those up then as well. So with the budget, obviously it's a really big set piece of any government. It's really essentially translating all the kind of political words and rhetoric and announcements into what are the spending and how are they funding that spending, whether it's by reshuffling expenditure elsewhere or by additional borrowing. So we'll take you through just a little highlight of those things. And of course, for all of us, the big thing here is the ch changes that were announced for the KiwiSaver in the last budget. So let's kick in. First, a little bit of the disclaimer. As always, I'm the economist. I'm not a financial advisor, so this content is our opinions and for general information only. It doesn't relate to your particular financial situation or goals and is not financial advice or recommendations. So just to that context, remember that it's not specifically about you, but more about the policy. And if you have questions, please get in touch and we'll try and make sure we try and to be able to answer that. Thank you to our members. Thank you for supporting us. If you want to keep in touch, we're always happy to hear from you. But also my colleagues Liv, Jenny, and I, we have two podcasts: Money Made Simple with Liv and Jenny, and Economy Made Simple with me. That's monthly, and we've just done our second one, which is on government finances, as I mentioned. So the budget that just came through. So there's so many announcements in the budget, and there's a lot around how much money we spend and then what we spend it on. The picture on the left-hand side gives you a bit of a long-term picture of how much money government spends. The dark green bars is the spend on operating expenditure. So that's essentially things like, all the bits of money that we spend, but not on investment in new infrastructure, new buildings, those kinds of things. That's in that light shaded green area. And what you can see is that the government spending has in fact been increasing a little bit even under this government, but is forecast to decrease as they try to reduce government spending. So it's that signal austerity, but we haven't seen much austerity yet. Most of the austerity that we have experienced so far has been a reduction in infrastructure investment in the last 12 months compared to the year before. On the right-hand side is a little bit of a breakdown of how to think about government finances. So the government raises money in two ways. The first is around taxes. It's your PAYE, it's the GST that we pay, the tax on corporate profits. That's that first green bar. So on a per capita basis, that's just over $20,000 a person. And then there's a bunch of other revenue that government earns. It's things like, the ETS levies, all those other taxes and levies that we pay that are not part of the general tax collection. And then the government spends money on things like health, education, justice. That's the first orange bar. That's the operating expenditure. We also spend money on servicing our debt, the net interest payments. And then we, of course, make new investments. That's that last orange bar. So that gives you a little bit of a feel for where the government raises money, where it spends money. And when there's a shortfall, which is that gray bar, they can fund it either by selling assets or borrowing more money, which is what we mostly do. We tend to use borrowing money as the main financing tool. Um, in terms of what we spend our money on, that's the picture on the left-hand side. That's the total number of dollars that are being spent on each of these appropriations. So health is really big. Welfare is, of course, very large. So Welfare, excluding New Zealand Super, is the second, and New Zealand Super on its own is the third largest item that we spend money on. On the right-hand side, you can see where the growth in spending has been coming from. I split it up between the effect of inflation and population change, which is running at about 3.5% at the moment, and then the bits that are underlying, which is that shaded, lightly shaded green area. And you can see that in terms of the increase, most of the biggest increases are coming from health and then from New Zealand Super. Quite a big increase in expenditure on transport, which is the new investment in roads and things, recovering from a big slowdown in the previous year. And you can also see at the bottom of the chart that the biggest reduction in spending has been in core government services, which is what was promised by this government when it was elected, but also around economic development and other policies. So there's a whole bunch of things going on in the government, and it's a pretty large beast, right? It's 160 odd billion dollars of total spending. Over the course of the past year, over the course of the next financial year, sorry, government spending is going to increase by about $1.3 billion dollars. That means that it's not going to keep up with the increase in population and inflation, which would have been about 1.5. So essentially, this budget is very much about keeping things under constraint, so that they're trying to create the pressure to find savings elsewhere. And this is a very busy picture, but this is how I kind of analyze the government accounts. I look at the statement of appropriations, and for 2026, all the orange areas are the ones that have declined, and all the green areas are the ones that have increased. So what we're finding is about two-thirds of the votes have their funding reduced, one-third has increased. But even within the votes, we're seeing big reshuffling from one type of investment into another or one type of spending to another. So this just gives you a sense that, it's very easy to kind of get caught up in the headlines, but there is a lot of changes that are going in underneath, and it'll be very specific to particular parts of government. You might have seen quite a lot of chat about debt and those kinds of things. I just want to explain to you where that debt comes from a government perspective. On the left-hand side is the statement of cash flows. So that picture, those dark green bars, that's essentially when we are spending less than we are earning. So if our spending on operations is less than our taxes and other revenues, then those are green bars. When it turns orange, it means that we're spending more than our revenue. Those light orange, light green bars are our investments. And essentially, my view is that as long as the investment projects are good, we should be borrowing money for that, because the idea is that it creates assets and also it creates future economic and income growth that is able to pay off the debt. And so what you can see from this orange bars is that New Zealand typically tends to spend less than it earns that in operations. That's the right thing to do. So we are either putting it away in the New Zealand Super Fund or paying off debt, whatever it might be. But you can see there's some episodes when it turns orange. The first was after the global financial crisis and the earthquakes in Canterbury. So that was really important that instead of saying that, oh, we can't possibly do anything, we're going to do something about it. We're going to run temporary deficits because it's a very unusual period. And then we did it again through that period of the pandemic, and you can see some pretty big shifts. But these things move around a lot, and as you can see that, you know, on the right-hand side, the consequence of this borrowing is that we've been starting to borrow more money. So the first big increase in debt was from 2008, 2009 onwards. We paid off a little bit of it in the years that came afterwards, and the last few years, borrowing has increased again. And of course, we've continued to increase borrowing both for investment but also for operations. The way I describe it is like you're borrowing against the mortgage to pay for your groceries as well as to do some repairs and maintenance on your home. And you can see that debt continues to increase because we want to give tax cuts, but we don't want to actually, we're unable to make the reductions in government's investment and to keep up with the increase in infrastructure investment that's required for New Zealand. Now, that's the kind of the budget stuff. So one of the, I guess, the centerpieces of the budget was the changes in the KiwiSaver. I won't say I loved it because I think there's some issues with it, mainly in that it reduces the incentives for people to lock up their savings for a long period. But also that we're creating all these pressures on Kiwis saving for Kiwis, but we're not doing enough to actually encourage and incentivize people to do that. So the big changes that minimum contribution will increase gradually over time. So currently it's 3% for the employee and 3% for the employer, and it will increase to 3.5% each from the 1st of April 26. And then it will increase to 4% plus 4% from the 1st of April 2028. You can apply to the IRD to reduce it to 3%. You don't have to contribute 4%. But if you contribute 3% as an employee, your employer will also contribute 3%. That means your income in effect will be less, so you'll get a pay cut. The other thing that's happening is the government contribution, the subsidy that's currently there, which is up to $521, that's going to be halved. So it's going to go from $521 to $261. And it's also going to be means tested. So if you earn over $180,000, that will no longer be available. And the final kind of big pillar of this change is that it's going to bring 16 and 17-year-olds into the kind of full benefits of KiwiSaver. Previously, 16 and 17-year-olds, they could not access the government subsidy, and there was no requirement for the employer contribution. So both of those things are now going to change. So if you're 16 or 17, the employer will have to contribute if you contribute, and you'll be able to access the government contribution, even though it is going to be smaller than it has been so far. So that's actually a really good thing because there was no real reason why 16 and 17-year-olds should have been discouraged from saving when those over 18, 18 and over were able to access it before. It was a little bit of a quirk in the policy that I'm glad to see that it has changed. So how does it kind of work out? So I just did some numbers for the average person in New Zealand. So the average wage in New Zealand is about $75,000 a year. So on the left-hand side is how it currently works. So the employee currently contributes 3% of their gross income, but it's taken from your net pay, right? So this is taken in after the taxes you pay. Then the employer pays 3% of your gross pay, but then they have to pay the ESCT, the tax on it. And so it's never going to be the same. And you can see that orange bar. And then there is the government subsidy of $521. And so for the average person earning $75,000 a year, currently you'll be contributing roughly around $4,350 per year into your KiwiSaver. On the right-hand side is what will happen if you increase your savings with the new policy. So this is 4% plus 4%, but the subsidy falls. So your employee contribution will increase to $3,000. The employer will also do the same. They will have to pay a higher ESCT, and the subsidy will be smaller. And on the right-hand side, you can see all up, you'll be saving roughly about $1,000 more per year. And there's a bit of that additional money that top up over there. That's all KiwiSaver related. So if you don't contribute that additional percent, or if you don't contribute at all, that's roughly the amount that you might be leaving on the table. So, the conversations that I've had with financial advisors in the last couple of days is their advice to people is always, make sure you contribute enough to maximize your entitlements because otherwise, you're not making the most of the opportunities that are there. Here's the kind of the near and long-term effects. So very much a scenario rather than, specifically for individuals. But again, just taking that $75,000 earning average person, their KiwiSaver contribution will increase by about $1,000. But your take-home pay, so the after tax, after everything pay that lands in your bank account, is going to be less. So this is going from 3% plus 3% to 4% plus 4%. The perverse thing here is that because the ESCT will increase and because the government subsidy will fall, the net effect of this policy change is the government will take more money. Its fiscal position will improve. So its net tax revenue will improve as a result of it. It's quite unusual for governments around the world to essentially disincentivize private savings for pensions. Because what we're asking is for all of us to create private savings so that we have independence at retirement. And most countries provide some kind of incentives for people to do that because you're locking your money up for a long time and you can't use it. But essentially, this set of policies makes the benefit greater for government, and it's essentially taxing you more. It's a tax grab, and essentially that tax increase is about half of the tax cut that was announced in the last budget. Now, having said that, if you look at the net effect on individuals, currently, of course, if you start at your age 16 and oh, sorry, I can't remember this exact scenario, but if you start at age 18, I think was this analysis is at the current rate at 3% plus 3% plus the $521. And when that increases to 4% plus 4% to this plus 261, you are going to be saving quite a lot more. So for an average person, the upside is quite significant in terms of because you're contributing more. So of course you're going to have more money left over at the end of it, assuming that markets kind of behave on average as we have experienced in the past. And when I look at the 16 and 17-year-olds, there is a real benefit to people starting earlier. So if you start at 18, if you look at the very left-hand side picture, that's what happens if you start at the age 18. If you start at age 16, roughly speaking, you'll have about $50,000 more at retirement. Um, but also, of course, the real sensitive to the kinds of savings that you put yourself into. So one of the things that we talk a lot about at Simplicity is that, focus on the things you can control, like the amount of fees that you pay, because the more fees that you pay, unless you're getting substantially high returns, there might be making quite a big effect on your retirement savings. So for 16 and 17-year-olds, I think it's really helpful in that it's a very strong signal that as soon as you're eligible to work, you're now eligible to save for your retirement. So the employer contribution is available, the government subsidy is available. Starting earlier, 2 years earlier, means that by the age 65, you're going to have $50,000 more in your retirement savings in nominal terms, about 20,000 in real terms. And it's really easy to do. You can ask your employer, but you can also join up online. Just needs your ID number and your ID in 5 minutes. So I think for young people, if you are a young person or know young people, it's worth really thinking about this. I forgot to mention, if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A. Very happy to pick it up at the end of this presentation, which is not long to go. The reason why I guess I was a little bit disappointed is New Zealand has a pension system that's under quite a lot of pressure, right? Yes, New Zealand Super is universal and it's quite generous. It's wonderful, but it's also becoming quite unsustainable. So roughly about 20% of all our taxes are currently being paid on New Zealand Super. On average, we're spending about $8,000 per person who's employed to pay super at the moment. So that pressure is going to keep increasing over time, and we're not very well prepared. In the current budget, they've announced quite a lot of means testing, whether it's for the subsidy for KiwiSaver or whether it's getting access to welfare for young people. These things are good in the sense that, yes, we should have means testing, but it's a little bit ironic that means testing is being applied to incentives for people to save money and other things, but we're not doing the same for things like New Zealand Super, which is actually the bit that's the elephant in the room. It's really expensive. So if you look at the NPV or the net present value of the New Zealand super payments for the next 100 years, 95 years, it's about $900 billion. The current assets that we have in New Zealand Super Fund is not even close to paying for it. So, we are not really well prepared. So at some point in time, we need to think very hard about what's going to happen. Now, our politicians are finding it very, very difficult to have this conversation because nobody wants to take anything away because people feel like they have paid for it and they deserve it, which is of course not true because all the taxes we pay today is for the people who are receiving super today rather than your own super in the future. That's the difference with KiwiSaver. You're saving your own money for your own retirement, and this is your kind of insurance plan against whatever might happen to the New Zealand super system and pension system in the future. So because our pension system is getting harder, I think it's really important that we keep focusing on how we save for ourselves because KiwiSaver is one of those really good tools that helps us to be able to do that. So here's a little bit of a tree diagram that I use in my head. It might be right for everybody, but it might just help you have this conversation. So the question that I ask is KiwiSaver best for your retirement savings? And it may not be for everybody. If it's not, make sure you get some independent financial advice because it might still be that making the minimum amount of contributions will mean that you're maximizing your entitlements and you might still want KiwiSaver, but that not might not be your main way to save for retirement. It could be one of the ways. So please also look at other ways of doing it, and getting good financial advice is a good way to do that. But for a lot of us who are mainly people who are in employment, so if we're working in a wage kind of situation, then by and large, KiwiSaver is a good idea to participate in, because not only do you make the contribution, you get the employer contribution and you get the subsidy from government, even though that has been reduced. And I've talked about this before, but essentially there are kind of big four things that you want to think about. The first one is, the choose the scheme or the provider that you're in, the type of fund that you're going to be in that's commensurate to the type of risk profile that you should be taking in your current stage of life, and how much you contribute. So essentially, you should try and contribute uh, enough to be able to maximize those employer contributions and the subsidy, but you might also have some other motivations in terms of how much you want to save for your home or for your retirement, and it might be a good way and good disciplined way for you to be able to save. But the main thing that we kind of talk about is there might also be other ways for you to save, because KiwiSaver might locks it up until you're age 65. So having some of your savings in other things like an investment fund might also be a good idea. So people have lots of personal situations that are different, and getting good advice and thinking about it carefully is really useful. So, as a little bit of a wrap up, I guess, the changes that we have seen at the budget is very much about saying that New Zealanders should contribute more to save for their own retirement. And I don't have a problem with it. I think it's helpful signal to send, because we do need to save more. The current rate of 3% plus 3% is actually not enough to give all of us the kinds of retirement lifestyle that we want. So slowly progressing that is a useful thing. But the thing that worries me is that we're taking away the incentives, and it's essentially being used as a way to raise more tax revenue rather than to increase incentives for us to be able to save for our retirement, and to essentially reward us for locking up our money for the long time until we reach retirement age. So, slightly kind of uncomfortable in that our direction of travel in pension policy is very much about tinkering with KiwiSaver, not really doing anything around a wider pension system that's making it unsustainable, which is New Zealand Super. But in the meantime, if you look at the policies, there is still good reason for us to get on board with the increases in contributions. Despite the reduction in the incentive, the net effect is if you contribute more, that is, if you save regularly and habitually over a long period of time, you are going to end up with more money. So I'll kind of stop there with my kind of question with my presentation, and I'll pick up the questions that have been coming through, so that we can answer your questions. And like I said before, if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A. And if you have any questions that I haven't been able to answer, get in touch with a friendly customer services team, or drop me an email. I'm at shamabil.yakub@simplicity.kiwi. Okay, your questions. Here's a question, and it says from Paul in Christchurch. I'm 79, haven't touched my KiwiSaver investment. Will I be in any way affected by the changes, please? Paul, no, nothing will happen to your KiwiSaver. So these changes are only about the additional contributions in the future, and mainly for those people who are currently in employment. So nothing will be affecting your particular situation, but I think it's still a good time to have a little think about what are you doing with your KiwiSaver? What do you want to do with the savings? But yeah, no immediate effects for people who are already retired and are not contributing any further. A question from Joel. Currently have money in the growth fund. How do I mitigate tariff and government contribution cuts? Already contributing 10% of wages earned, hope to buy a house, but guess that is not going to happen for a while. What can I do? So when it comes to tariffs, that's a really tough one, because it's creating volatility in financial markets, and that we don't know how to kind of resolve that, right? So this volatility in markets will happen regardless of what kind of decisions we can make, which is around what we contribute and how we invest in those kinds of things. So I'd say for now, that's probably more around making sure you're in the right kind of risk and the right kind of fund for you. The second thing was around with the government contribution cuts. Well, while the government subsidy is reducing, you are already contributing a really high amount, and you're doing the right thing in terms of saving regularly and habitually. You'll still be able to access that money for your first home deposit, so nothing changes. But you might want to think about making sure that your fund is in the right kind of thing if you want to access that money quickly, because high growth funds will tend to be more volatile, whereas the balance fund might be less volatile. So please get some advice on that because it's just making sure that you're in the right kind of investment, given that you want to use the money quickly. I don't think there is any kind of big changes you need to make from what I can see, but that individual advice would be best coming from a financial advisor. Um, all right, a really good question. I'm self-employed and will likely earn over 180,000, so I won't get the government contribution. Is KiwiSaver still worth it? What are the benefits? So if you're not getting for self-employed, KiwiSaver has always been a little bit difficult, right? When I was working for myself and self-employed, I only contributed the minimum amount to get the full government contribution, and I didn't contribute any extra because why would you save in a fund that would be locking it up for a long period of time? But now that I work at Simplicity, it makes a lot of sense for me because as a result of it, I can access both my employer contribution as well as the government subsidy. As always, get some personal advice, but generally speaking, for self-employed, KiwiSaver will not be the right thing if you're not accessing any of the incentive. But you should still have a really good plan to make sure that you are investing for your retirement, which doesn't go away. So whether it's in KiwiSaver or in some other way, the total retirement narrative remains the same, but certainly the incentive for self-employed people to contribute to KiwiSaver has diminished quite significantly. There are, from what I can see, in terms of being in KiwiSaver versus another investment that's commensurate, there is no super benefit for you. Will asks, do you think changes to KiwiSaver will push more people towards investing platforms like Sharesies or even a savings account that compounds monthly? Well, the KiwiSaver changes, while they're less generous, they're still really positive in the sense that if you think about what happens, the scenario that I presented, if you don't contribute to KiwiSaver, you don't get the employer contribution and you don't get the subsidy. So it's still the right thing to maximize your entitlements to make sure that you get the biggest benefit that you can for yourself. So if you are investing directly in Sharesies or in investment funds or whatever else, or putting it into a bank account, those things are fine, but you're not maximize your income. So I don't think I think it would be bad advice to say that you shouldn't do KiwiSaver and should do something else, because that would mean that you necessarily maximize your entitlements and your total income. So I think it's really important you sit down and carefully think about what does participating in KiwiSaver mean for you? For most of us, it will mean that we get access to the employer contributions and to the subsidy. Despite the changes, those things do add up to quite a lot of money for most people. And not participating means that you might actually have less take-home pay or test less total remuneration as a result of it. So another question from Anonymous. If you don't have an employer, self-employed contractor, is it a good idea to raise contributions to 8% as if you did have an employer? So let me answer the question in terms of that in the context of your wider retirement goals and your wider savings goals. So if you think about KiwiSaver and the benefits of KiwiSaver, it's around that matching rate and the access to the subsidy. Those two things are really powerful drivers of improving your total returns, total contributions, and as a result, your total retirement savings. But if you're self-employed, um, you won't get much benefit because you're both the employee and the employer, so you're paying yourself that amount. I think the main thing is that you need to be very clear about how much money you should be putting away regularly so that you're comfortable in your retirement. But in terms of the incentives, the maximum incentive is for you to contribute that $1,000 so then you can get the subsidy. Beyond that, it's just money that you're putting in for your retirement on your own bat rather than because of your responding to incentives, if that makes sense. So, again, that advice, the financial advice is really helpful here because it will help you maximize your retirement goals and where and how you should save that. So back to my chart flow, flow chart, it might be that you might not save all your retirement savings in KiwiSaver, but you might have some of it in KiwiSaver to attract whatever of those subsidies you can attract, and you might put the rest in your investment fund, which would also be for your retirement, but you'd have the added benefit of having more flexibility and access to it earlier. So, but if you feel like you can't help yourself from touching the money, that you almost need to protect it from yourself. For talked to some people who use KiwiSaver as a little bit of that buffer between them and their kind of, I guess, discipline to save for retirement. What about the SSRSS scheme? Will employer contributions also increase to 4% too? I don't actually know what that is, so I'm sorry, but I don't know how to answer the question because I don't know it. Okay, another question. In the bigger picture, wouldn't it make more sense to give all children government contribution and reduce super in the long run? Wouldn't returns help reduce required government spending? The answer is yes. If the reality is that if we could move towards a more private system, as they have done in Australia, where about half of people have private pensions, things like KiwiSaver, and the other half still access their superannuation payments that feels about the right kind of mix. So instead of spending, say, $23 billion as we are on New Zealand Super, we could be spending half that, and because we've helped other people to prepare for the retirement. So the answer is absolutely that if we could help people save for their retirement and we could encourage people to keep investing in their private pension, especially for the half of New Zealanders that earn enough and have enough wealth, it would make a big difference because our pension system would be fundamentally more sustainable and we wouldn't be getting into the kinds of, I guess, almost generational fights that we're shaping up for in the future. Um, but theoretically, it makes a lot of sense. Right now, we're not having enough traction across our political parties. My personal belief is there are too many old people in charge who are just maintaining the status quo and don't want to make difficult choices because somebody has to lose. We need to make some choices gradually over time, like increasing the retirement age, like implementing uh, means testing. But those things need to be done really carefully and gradually because we can't just impose it quickly and make a whole bunch of people worse off and put people into poverty. Question. If today's taxpayers are funding today's pensioners, they're definitely entitled to assume they will be supported in retirement. No, not really, because you've done nothing to prepare for a known increase in the number of people who are going to retire. And this is a constant fight that we're having. People have this kind of extraordinary idea that because I paid for 5 people today, the future workers should pay for 10 people. Well, how is that fair? We've known this has been coming for decades. The fact that people get older is not a mystery. You don't need an economist to figure that out. The fact that we have failed to prepare for it, the fact that we have failed to prepare for it and plan for it, means that these generations, our generations, who are choosing to keep the status quo, do not, in fact, deserve the same kind of entitlements because we have chosen not to make it sustainable. Not a question. Thank you so much for doing this, Shamil. Very helpful insights. Thank you. A question from YouTube. What I find disturbing is that governments can chop and change at will with their long-term retirement savings. These things should be more protected from this. Again, New Zealand Super needs to be protected from government meddling like John Key did at the time. Do you have any potential solutions for this? The answer is there are no easy solutions. And the power of democracy is that we choose governments to do our will. And if we don't like what they're doing, we kick them out. And this happens all the time, right? We have changes of governments regularly. But the difficulty, of course, is that we don't want to have a democracy where it becomes so ossified that nothing changes, that nothing is able to be changed. So how do we find that separation? So, and I think this is where KiwiSaver is an interesting thing is that because it's your own money, because it's your own savings, governments can't reach into it and touch it, but they can change and fiddle with the systems around it, like the incentives and the rates of contributions and those bits and pieces. Do I have any solutions that are immediate? The answer is no. Is there a wider solution? And the wider solution, I think, is really around if we are decided on what we want for a retirement system, and that becomes well understood by politicians. Because politics is done by polling, they are constantly asking their pollsters to figure out how we feel about things. I think we have to send a very strong signal that pension systems are important. Our savings are really important to us. We don't want you messing with this. When you mess with it, we're going to vote you out. And it's only when we do it that way that we're going to find the feedback loop. Otherwise, it's very difficult in a functioning democracy for us to do it in another way. So, really good question, but I'm sorry I don't have an easy answer. Um, Another question from YouTube. Means testing people who have worked hard and saved all their lives will just force people to either spend all their lives, um, just either spend all their lives and to hell with super, leave it to the government, or they'll hide their assets. Thoughts? Um, Means testing is something that essentially happens in most things, right? It happens in how much tax we pay in terms of what entitlements we get. What is unique about New Zealand Super is that we've made that universal because when it was first implemented, most people didn't live long enough and there weren't that many old people. So it was very affordable. It has gotten bigger over time, but has become enmeshed in what we think. So when it comes to the people saving for their retirement and giving people hope. That's why we can't have a system that has no incentives for people to save for the long term. So in most countries around the world where they have private pension systems, there are pretty strong encouragements. So New Zealand is unusual in that we don't give a lot of inducements for people to lock up their savings for their retirement. Typically, the way we do it is you save from your after-tax income, and then you pay tax on the way through, but there is no tax on the way out. So you pay all the tax up front and on the way through. In most other countries, there are some pretty big, significant incentives for people to save for the long term because there is a cost of locking up your money for the long term, even though it's the right thing to do from an individual and even social perspective. Um, so, if we don't means test, what do we do? Should we just leave it to the government? But what is the government? Fundamentally, the government is the people's will, however that is expressed in political form. So, no, I don't think we should think about means testing as somehow going to give the strong incentive that everybody should hide their money or spend all their money. I think maybe at the margin. But for most of us, we do want to have a comfortable retirement. And we do want to have a pension system that works. And I think we need to be clear that there are some costs. There are no unicorns here. We're going to have to make some choices, and that might be that some means testing for entitlements, but at the same time balance with incentives for people to save for the long term would be a good thing to do. A question from YouTube from Opal. Isn't it better to save admin costs by universalizing everything and then just redistribute by better taxes? A great question. The answer is, in theory, that would be fine. So you're right that the New Zealand Super is really, really simple to deliver. It's also really, really expensive. So New Zealanders are very unwilling to pay taxes. So our taxes are pretty much the middle of the road when it comes to the OECD, but our expectations for our superannuation payments, our health, our education are all like Scandi countries, right? We want best services, we want the best medicines, we want the best doctors, we want the best nurses. Well, those two things don't add up. So if we want to have a universal system, then we have to have a tax base that is much, much larger. And that's where the political conflict becomes much, much more difficult. So it's an idea that I think we've always toyed with, and in New Zealand Soup, that's exactly what we have done. Is we have a universal system because it's very easy to administer. It's very elegant for all those reasons, but at the same time, it's enormously expensive. One in every five tax dollars is now being spent on New Zealand Super. Yes, it's efficient, but is it taxes that we want to pay? And I think therein lies the political risk that I don't know how we solve quickly. A question from Carol. Um, Peter Zeihan's book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning, claims that New Zealand is one of the few countries that don't have a demographic time bomb ticking away. So it is super genuinely unsustainable. So is super genuinely unsustainable? Do you have any relevant stats for this? Well, we actually have some. New Zealand has a demographic time bomb like everybody else. It's just a little bit later because we have so much immigration. But here is the trick, even immigrants get older, right? So while immigration delays the effect of aging, it doesn't go away. So no, so if you have a look at the long-term fiscal stuff that the Treasury has done, it's really good stuff. They're updating that work at the moment, but have a look at some of the Treasury material. Really good work. I think it's pretty well considered. We have an aging issue just like everybody else. I can't remember the exact date, but in the course of the next 25 years, all the taxes from work will be spent on two things: New Zealand Super and health. So, no, I don't think our current system is at all sustainable. Our demographics are catching up with us just like everybody else. We're nowhere like Japan, which is aging really fast, but we're catching up pretty quickly. There's a question from Anonymous. Is there any point in contributing more than 4%? Look, if you're contributing more than 4%, it's because you want to keep it in KiwiSaver specifically. But if you want to save more, it might be either you do it in KiwiSaver, so it's locked up until you're retired, or you might want to save it in an investment fund. Again, this is kind of one of the situations where your personal financial situation is really, really critical. So getting good advice to do that. So I think there's a two-part question. One is around how much should I be saving? How much do I want to save? And where should I put that money? Some of that money might be in KiwiSaver. So at that 4% when the policy comes in, that is going to be your sweet spot because you're going to maximize your entitlements. If you put more in, you'll still benefit in retirement because you'll have more money, but there is no sweetener for you to add in that extra money. So the cost of putting it in KiwiSaver is that it's locked up until you're 65. It might also be the benefit for you. Or you might choose that additional amount of savings that you're putting in, you're going to put it into an investment fund, which is very similar. It's just that has the benefit of being more accessible. So that's probably how I would think about it. Again, it's one of the situations where it's really important you make sure that it's right for your particular financial situation. A question from B. George. Will the new government contribution still require the 1,043 deposited? Yes, that's exactly what's going to happen. So essentially what's happened is they've halved the contribution rate. So how much you contribute has remained the same, but the amount of subsidy they give is going to be half of that. So it means that you still have to contribute that $1,043 to be able to access that maximum amount of government subsidy. A question. Does your crystal ball indicate that it is inevitable that New Zealand Super will have to be means tested in the future? Hence, maximizing your KiwiSaver balance for a 50-year-old me is becoming more and crucial now. Hayden from Hawke's Bay. Well, Hayden, I'm going to be honest with you. My ability to predict the future is just as bad as everybody else's. But fundamentally, when it comes to things like super or any other government spending, is about the trade-offs. If we don't change super in the course of the next 20 years, then we'll probably have significant changes in other things. For example, we might change how much money we have for education or infrastructure or for investments or whatever, right? So there are always these trade-offs around what we're able to do. And so I think it's more about going because we're being so slow in improving our overall pension system, right? The whole setup in terms of super, in terms of tax system, in terms of KiwiSaver, in terms of how much infrastructure we invest in New Zealand, so our country is as profitable and as prosperous as it can be. It means that what can I do as an individual to give myself some comfort? And the reason why I'm a big proponent of KiwiSaver and for retirement savings more generally at an individual level is if you can't be sure that the government will be there for everyone, what can you do today that will set you up right? And I think, you know, if you have the means, it's always a good idea to have that financial buffer because that's what gives you choices and that's what gives you options. If you don't need it when you retire, great. If you do need it, well, you're well prepared. So my advice to everybody is that, if you're thinking out 25, 50 years, the future is completely unknown and we should be prepared for it. But we know that because of the demographics, it is going to become more difficult for us to maintain the status quo. And as a result, we should ask ourselves, what can I do today to take control and take charge? Another question about the SSRSS scheme. I just don't know what that is, so I'm sorry, but I can't answer that. Or state sector retirement scheme. I still don't know how that works, so I'm not sure I can answer that. So sorry about that. Question from Clemon. Funny thing is, changing retirement age will end up hitting the people who aren't causing the problems. The millennial cohort is smaller, don't you think? Well, the reality is that you're right, is in the sense that there is never a good time to do these kinds of things, right? Because you're changing the entitlements and the unwritten social contract of what we want, what we promise to each other. So the promises are fine because promises on their own are not enough, right? You have to do something to make the promise real. And so if you look at our the way that our social New Zealand superannuation related regulation is written, it's very clear, right, that we kind of give these commitments, but we need to work hard to make sure that it's made sustainable over time. That's the bit successive governments, not just this one, successive governments have failed to do. Now, the benefit of increasing the retirement age or the eligibility age gradually over time is it gives people time, but it's also commensurate with the fact that our life expectancy generally is increasing. So for most of it, it should be okay because it means that as a share of our lived life, we're still going to be as well off. Um, there is no, there's no magic time when we can do this because we really should have done it in the 90s in terms of building our private pension system when we still had time. We should have signaled an increase to the eligibility age gradually over time, making sure our welfare system was good enough for those people who couldn't work in older age because their bodies gave out, right? So there's all these kinds of things we should have done. And as you know, we had tried it in the past, but politics was very difficult. So there are no easy answers here, but at some point in time, we're going to have to make trade-offs. And those trade-offs, I think, will require us to ask some very good hard questions around what is it that we want to pay for and how do we want that to be shared in terms of the costs and benefits across New Zealand. A question from anonymous attendee. Apologies if you've covered it. I've seen comments that if you are self-employed, running your own business and earning over 180,000, there isn't much point to putting into a KiwiSaver going forward. Although I haven't seen clarity as to why. Is this correct? The answer is roughly yes, because you get no incentives to put your money into KiwiSaver and lock it up until your retirement. But the thing that I was showing before in my little decision tree is that even if KiwiSaver is not right, you still have to have a retirement plan. And so I think the first question is, how much do I want to save for my retirement? How much should I be putting away regularly? And then the question becomes, should I put it into KiwiSaver or some other way of saving for my retirement? So if there are no incentives, no sweetness for you to save in KiwiSaver, it might be that you're better off to invest into an investment fund or some other way. But don't forget that you should still be absolutely preparing for retirement. So this is again where having access to good financial advice is really, really important to make sure that you're doing the right thing for you. It's about maximizing those entitlements so that you are as well prepared for your retirement as you can be. The benefit of KiwiSaver is that benefit and the cost of KiwiSaver in this instance is that you're locking it up until retirement age at 65. Okay, Jackie. Kira, I'm 40 years, contributing 10%. One worry I have is that the government may change the age that the KiwiSaver can be accessed from 65 years to an older age by the time I get there. Is it realistic? Look, it's a risk that is always there. So if the eligibility age increases at some point in the future, it might be that KiwiSaver policies, access to KiwiSaver also changes. So again, so a very personal example is I contribute the maximum amount for me to get the maximum benefits in terms of my employee contribution and the government subsidy. My additional savings I do to the side in other things because I want that to be accessible to me regardless of any changes in government policy. So I'm not going to give you personal advice, but that's how I do it. And I think you should really ask for some personal advice there because that would really help you understand what is the best way for you to be able to save for your retirement. KiwiSaver is a really good tool and a really important tool, but there are also other ways to be able to save for retirement that doesn't have the effect of locking it in until the pension eligibility age. So um, I don't know if it's realistic. It feels like the retirement in age, the entitlement age, is something we're going to be talking about over the course of the coming decades. I just have no clear prediction of when that might happen. A question from anonymous attendee. Are you saying that it is better for school leavers to go straight into full employment at age 16 rather than doing tertiary study? No, I'm not saying that. So that little scenario that I showed you was for the average person through their life. Most people who are in their ages 16 and 17 are working part-time and earning relatively small amounts. What I'm saying is that if you're already working, which is quite common for most young people, then it will be beneficial for you to have access to this KiwiSaver because you get the full benefits of the scheme. You get the employer contribution as well as the government subsidy. And that means that by the time that you get to retirement, because of the powers of compounding and the powers of regular savings, you're going to be better off as a result of it. So it's not so much that you shouldn't be going to tertiary education. It's more that the longer you save, the more regularly that you save, you maximize the total income and the maximize the total amount of retirement savings you have as a result. When it comes to tertiary education or any kind of qualification post school, there are still some significant benefits to lifetime incomes as a result of the education. Not everywhere, and certainly the premium has been falling over time. But having access to good quality vocational education, having access to good quality tertiary qualifications, quite often mean that you're going to be earning quite a significant amount more over your lifetime. So it's really important that when it comes to career advice, again, you get really good personalized career advice. I've done a lot of work in the construction sector, for example, and there's some fabulous examples of people who've made good lives, meaningful work by working in trades. So whether it's in builders or building or electricians or plumbers, there are heaps of different pathways for people to have good lives, good meaningful work, but also to have sufficient income and good retirement savings. So no, the answer is not so much that you shouldn't go to university or to a trade school, more that if you are working, make sure you're making the most of the incentives that are available. Jane asks, would raising the eligibility age to 67 in the next 5 years be enough for the next 20 years, or what would make the best sense? Oh, look, there is no easy kind of way for us to do this because the aging population is so big. We're probably going to have to do a selection of little different things. So we'll probably have to gradually increase the eligibility age, as well as gradually bring in some form of means testing for us to be able to bring in the amount of cost of aging. So the cost of aging is not just New Zealand Super, that's only one part of it. It's the most visible part, and it's already increasing really fast. The bigger reason why I'm worried about aging population in New Zealand is not only do we know that we're going to increase spending on New Zealand Super, we're also going to have higher costs in health, and we're also going to have higher costs in housing because so many more people are retiring with mortgages or still renting. And those people are becoming a larger burden of housing subsidies and housing support mechanisms. So the cost of aging is probably going to be much bigger than this one thing. So there's a lot of really big policy decisions that are coming down the pipe because of an aging population. So there are unfortunately not any easy answers in terms of the eligibility age as that tool for solving it. A question from Monique. Thanks for explaining the impact of Budget 25 in an accessible way. If you want to reassess your KiwiSaver contribution amount, what are the best steps to do this? Um, when it comes to your KiwiSaver contributions, I think it's really around asking yourself, what am I saving now? What will I be saving under the new regime over the next couple of years? Can I afford it? And if I don't do it, what would happen? So you can have that conversation with one of our client services team. If that's not the right thing for you, you could ask your financial advisor. If that's not the right thing for you, you can have a conversation with your colleagues or your HR person or your friends and family. But really, the question is, I think, again, starting from that very meso kind of perspective, going, how much do I want to save for my retirement? How much money should I have? If you go to the Sorted website, for example, there's some fabulous calculators that will help you do that. And it's really about asking yourself, what is the right amount of contributions I should make so then I can meet my lifestyle goals for when I'm retired. So that doesn't change. And then the secondary question becomes, should I put that money into KiwiSaver or to something else to be able to meet that goal? Like I said before, the benefit of being in KiwiSaver and the cost of being in KiwiSaver is that it's locked up until you're age 65, with the exception of hardship grants and first home buyer grants, for ability to withdraw for first home buyer and for hardship. So if you're struggling with this question, give us a call on the customer services team. We'll try and help steer you in the right direction. A question from Gus Gilmore. I have my adult children in a KiwiSaver scheme that is charging too many fees. Is it easy to move them to Simplicity? What's the process, please? It is super simple. Gus would love to look after your children. All you have to do is go on our website, Put in your details. I think you just need your ID number and your ID, and we'll take care of the rest. So come into our website, www.simplicity.kiwi, and it literally takes a few minutes, 2 minutes or less, I think, to be able to transfer. I did that recently, well, a little while ago, but it was pretty easy. Question from Anonymous. If you lose your job and become a beneficiary, which is happening to many people, what should you do about your KiwiSaver? Well, because you're not in employment, you're not getting the benefit of those contributions, right? And so when you are unemployed, it very much depends on your personal financial situation. If you have the resources, you should make sure that you're contributing $1,000 to be able to maximize the government subsidy. But beyond that, it's really about making sure you have the financial means to look after yourself while you're unemployed, and that you're getting ready for re-entering the workforce for whatever hopes and dreams that you might have. So KiwiSaver is probably, not a major priority during that period. But if you have the financial means, then it's very much about making sure you maximize your entitlements and keep saving what you can in the right possible way. But again, having that open conversation about making sure that you are not putting yourself into financial difficulty to be able to save for your retirement. It's always the trade-off, right? You want to make sure that you have a good life today as well as a good life in the future. It's not one or the other. It's about making sure we can deliver both of those things. So if you've lost your job, I think it's making sure that you have the financial means and resources, and if you can, to try and maximize that government subsidy because that's the main entitlement that you can access. A question from YouTube. Can you imagine the pressure on employees to request the cut to 3%, especially those that are already in strife? Look, I can imagine the pressure on a lot of people, and I think that's why it's going to be so important that we keep a very close eye on the statistics to see where that is happening and why that is happening. The reality is that if employees are being pressured into contributing less, so then it costs the employer less, that would be a really terrible thing to do and against the spirit of the law and of the policy. So, yes, a lot of pressures. I understand what's going on, and that's why I think we're going to be keeping a very close eye as independent watchers from the outside to make sure that we don't see bad behavior in businesses. In reality, if you think about the increases in contribution rates, it's not like these contributions, even though it's called the employer contribution, it's not really coming into the employer's pocket. The total amount that's the company pays for workers includes the contribution they make for KiwiSaver. So, what we haven't seen over the course of the last 20 years is the share of the economy that's going towards wages increasing as a result of KiwiSaver contributions. Nor have we seen an increase in contribution rates in Australia leading to that. So the reality is that any increases in contributions will in fact be coming out of our own pocket. So wage increases that would have otherwise have occurred will now be essentially be paying for this increase in contributions. So look, it's something that we need to be alive to, but also I can assure you that independent watchers and unions and others will be keeping a very, very close eye on that. Question from Anonymous. Sorry, I joined late to the webinar. So if you haven't answered this question earlier, I appreciate an answer. I noticed recently a move from employers asking the employee to compensate the employer's contribution with their salaries, i.e., consider the salary inclusive of employer's contribution. Is there any way to prevent this? Look, I'm not an employment lawyer, but I believe these are called total compensation or total remuneration contracts. And the Retirement Commission has some good work on this that says something like a fifth of businesses are using contracts like this. Um, I don't know the specific answer here other than to get really good advice in terms of what kind of employment contract and employment rights you have. So some of the resources I can think of the top of my head is Citizens Advice Bureau is really, really good in helping people to make sure the employment contracts are fair. Because we know that if it's a total REM contract, in those kinds of contracts that you're describing, the cost of the increase in contributions is going to be coming straight out of your net pay, and it is going to be, I think, quite unaffordable for some people. So I can't think off the top of my head anybody else to speak to directly, but I imagine Citizens Advice Bureau or employment contract specialists will be really good to ask this question to. We've still got a few questions, so I'll kick on. I know we're sort of running out of time, so for those of you who can't stay, thank you for joining us. I know it's a really big change, but also the overall theme is that it's still about you saving for your own retirement. Yes, the incentives have reduced, but by not participating, it would mean that you're actually earning less and saving less. So it might still make sense for most people to keep contributing to KiwiSaver, but please make sure that you understand your overall story in terms of how much you want to save for your retirement, how you want to save it, and where you want to save it. Those are quite big questions. If you're struggling, give us a call. We'll try and help. If we can't help, we'll try and direct you to people who can give you that personal advice that you need. So I'll keep on for a bit longer just because there's a few more questions. But goodbye to those of you who need to go. Um, Question. What are your thoughts around the possible increase of the retirement age and its potential impact on KiwiSaver accessing the super fund? Um, So the super fund is kind of a little bit separate. So there's kind of three big pieces here. The one is the New Zealand super payments. That's the money that you get paid on a stipend. It's essentially the welfare you get when you turn 65. There is no requirement for it, and all that money for that comes from taxes. So it's from the general operations of government. There is a New Zealand superannuation fund that was set up under Michael Cullen when he was the finance minister many years ago, and the idea was when we have surpluses, we'll save some money in this. They'll grow bigger over time, and it will help us moderate the cost of the pension system. And then we have KiwiSaver, which is you and I saving our own money for our own retirement. That's outside of the government system. There's New Zealand Super, there's the New Zealand Superannuation Fund, and then there is our money. So those things are not commingled, they're quite separate. So if the if the eligibility age increases from 65 to say 67 over time, that will affect when people can get the New Zealand Super. It doesn't really affect what happens to the New Zealand Superannuation Fund. That's the savings that will still be drawn down over time to be able to pay for New Zealand Super. What it might mean for KiwiSaver is that those people who are looking to access their KiwiSaver savings might have to access it a bit later, if that makes sense. So it's not really clear to me that there's going to be a huge difference for the New Zealand Super Fund, but quite significant differences for both the New Zealand Super access to it and to KiwiSaver in terms of when you might be able to extract it. A question from Tony. I'm looking to finish work by the time I'm 58, as I have an inheritance that will subsidize my income until 65. Do I have to continue making contributions to KiwiSaver in the intervening years to maintain the account, or is KiwiSaver able to sit at the current level until I turn 65 and become eligible to access the fund? Really good question, Tony. And I think the answer is there is no requirement for you to make contributions, but if you have the means, if you can contribute $1,000 odd per year, it means that you still get the government contribution. So it's essentially just making sure that you maximize your entitlements so that by the time you age 65, you have added in just a little bit more money and you have maximized those entitlements that you do have. But there is no requirement per se for you to have to keep contributing to maintain your KiwiSaver account. It will stay regardless of whether you contribute or not. Question from Justin from YouTube. A lot of people talk about the comparison between New Zealand and Australia contributions, quoting 10% over the ditch as the ideal standard. Is that 10% employee contributions plus another 10% from employers? So essentially, the way it works in Australia is really quite cool. It essentially goes, here's your base pay, and then there's super on top. And then some people choose to make voluntary contributions on top of that. So in Australia, they're moving to 12.5%. So it's quite a big change. And they have done it very gradually over a long period of time. So it's very much the case that they're saving that 12% is roughly where they're hitting 12 and a half. That's the total amount of minimum contribution that you have to make. And some people will make more contributions as voluntary contributions on top of that. Um, a question from Anonymous. Is it a good strategy to invest in a mix of KiwiSaver and also term deposits? The answer is, again, very personal. So, for example, I have some of my savings in term deposits to pay off things like provisional taxes and other things. So it's just making sure you have the right investments and the right products for what you want to use the money for. So, like I said before, there are two questions that you want to ask yourself. And the first is around how much do you want to save? And the second question is around where do we want to save it, including KiwiSaver as one of the products that you use. So when you're thinking about your retirement scheme and retirement plans, I'd encourage you to think about it from those two perspectives. Typically, people would keep money in things like term deposits for expenses or money that they might need in the near future because that money is accessible and it's protected from any downside in the short term. You know, we're kind of veering into a little bit towards personal financial advice. Again, it's really important you get that good advice from somebody who's qualified to give you that personal advice for your particular situation. Question from Anonymous. So, how do you think we should decrease pension entitlements equitably, i.e., so blue-collar workers and women are not disadvantaged? Means testing can be a very blunt instrument. And that's a really good question. And the answer is yes, it's really, really hard to do. In Australia, they've tried to kind of overcome that by making sure that New Zealand's that their superannuation is still available for just over half of the people there. So over half of people age 65 and over are accessing some form of government super because they haven't been able to save enough in their retirement and they need that support still. But half of the people are able to maintain their lifestyle with their own private savings. So it's really about making sure that we have a superannuation scheme and a system that is coherent and works well together. So the super payments are still generous, they're still easily accessible, and still give people dignity in life, but not for people who don't need it because it means that we're able to afford both of those things. So the way I think about it is rather than giving a small amount of money to lots of people, it might be better to give more money to a smaller number of people. And that's where means testing can be quite powerful to be able to do that. In terms of how do we make it more equitable over time? I think there's a few things there. The big thing for me is around just making sure that there's not a huge penalty between the superannuation payments and welfare payments. So one example that I would think about is, some people working in the construction industry quite often will not be able to work to the age 65 because their bodies will give out before then, particularly if you're doing much more of that heavy laboring type of work in the construction industry. For those people, if they have to retire because their body gives out, the amount of money that they earn through disability benefits or whatever might be a lot less than what they might earn in New Zealand Super. So having some equity between those two things might help. Really good question. Not a very easy answer. Um, Question. Could not disagree more. The lack of preparation for future super is due to governments, not to contributors. From the history of welfare, this is how tax has been justified and sold to citizens for years. So of course citizens are going to expect the return that they were led to expect. No, I disagree. So, the governments are not some foreign thing that lives over there. The governments are people we elect through our democratic processes. So it's not like it's some random thing that happens to us. It's not external to us. The very purpose of politics and for government is it's the reflection of what society wants, or at least a majority of society wants. So no, I'll have to disagree with you on that one because we, all of us collectively are part of this democratic process, and we have chosen to have taxes that are too low and a pension system that are too high to make sense over the long term. So this lack of preparation is on us. It's not on somebody else. I don't think we can point the finger to politicians and say somehow these are some kind of foreign people who don't represent us. The very purpose of democracy is to have representation of the public through the system of government. From YouTube, MG says, which system is best? Means testing pension plus mandatory and higher individual contributions Aussie or New Zealand Super pension plus optional and lower individual contributions? My money is very much on the Aussie system, even though their subsidies are too high. So there are some problems there too. But the reality is, at least they're prepared. So their super payments as a share of taxes is trending down over the course of the coming decades. And ours is escalating forever with no plan to actually deal with it. So no, I don't think our system is in any way a desirable one. I would much prefer something like the Australian one that will at least give us some comfort that the thing that we're looking for is going to be sustainable. A question from Carol. Looking after society's most vulnerable, the very young, the very old, and those who are physically or mentally challenged is the sign of a caring and socially cohesive democracy. I hope that governments of whatever color will continue to prioritize this. I'm happy for my taxes to go towards it. Look, Carol, I couldn't, no, I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right. I think, that's the mark of civilized society. So as you saw, despite the changes in the current budget, we're still spending large sums of our taxes on things like superannuation, on overall welfare, our health system, our education system. Those are the kinds of things that governments of different stripes over the years have prioritized because that's the kind of collective good, the collective thing that we want to deliver. But at the margin, we are walking back a lot of these things. So if you look at the detail of the budget, we are seeing, more means testing for welfare access, for example. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have good information on who's getting access to it and people who deserve it are getting it. But I think what we're seeing is even that is becoming less generous. So a sentiment I share. I just don't know whether we can sustain it if we have unconstrained spending on one thing like New Zealand Super that challenges that. So these are kind of those big challenges, big trade-offs that we always need to think about. A question from Anonymous. KiwiSaver would be more attractive if contributions weren't taxed or had a lower tax rate, but it seems that government is using KiwiSaver to raise revenue for employers. So fat chance of that, right? Thoughts? Look, that's exactly right. So in most countries where they have private pension systems, things like KiwiSaver or comparables to KiwiSaver, there are some incentives for people to lock up that money for the long term, right? Because that's essentially what we're saying is, Citizen X, you should save for your retirement, and in return for you locking up your money for the next 20 odd years or 40 years, we're going to tax you less, or we're going to give you some incentives and sweetness to do so. Um, what we've got with the latest change is essentially the government saying you should save more and you should be paying us more tax for the privilege of doing so. That doesn't quite feel right. And so I think we're going to have a bigger conversation around how do we make sure that the benefits of people saving for their retirement through KiwiSaver is recognized through some kind of incentives. And that effect of locking money up until the age of eligibility also has some constraints, and we should sweeten the deal for that. Are there any immediate moves to do that? No, as you have seen in the latest budget, it's actually heading in the other direction of, in fact, using this change in policy to raise tax revenue rather than to give an incentive for people to save. Question from Anonymous. How is Simplicity guarding against the current and probably ongoing erratic behavior of the US market? Has this led to the funds making any changes to guard against losses? Look, if you look back through the last couple of webinars that we did, which are available as recordings on the website, you'll see that our fundamental philosophy is that markets will go up and down over time, and our big approach is to be largely passive. So the way we invest is we look at big markets, we look at indexes, we screen them for things that we don't like cluster bombs and things like that. And what's left over is what we buy. And our strategy is that we'll do it at a low cost, we'll hold the market as a whole, and over time, these things will balance out. So we're not taking any active decisions yet, but we are looking at this very, very closely in our monthly investment committee meetings to make sure that our exposure to markets remains appropriate, that we're balancing the risks, and we're still comfortable and confident with the wider narrative, wider approach of how we invest. So really, it's very fairly hands-off in the sense that we are investing in the same way that we have invested over time. We are watching these changes really carefully. Only if there is big shifts in risks or asset allocations, then we'll make those changes as well. A good question from Libby. Do you think there is any chance of a bipartisan agreement for balancing the superannuation problem we're facing? Look, I think there is every chance of a bipartisan agreement to balance this in the future. Um, I don't think we have the ability to reach that cross-party consensus right now. And the reason I say this is because if you look at where our social cohesion is at the moment, we're becoming fractured and a little bit more polarized. That means our politics is very anti. We're trying to really bump against each other. And I think we need to have a crisis for us to come together to go, actually, there are some things that New Zealanders agree on as a whole. I don't think we're at the point of crisis yet. So unfortunately, I think we are not going to find that consensus and that grown-up approach to dealing with our super issues and aging issues until we face a crisis that's big enough that forces us to have those conversations. So I think it's entirely possible. I think there's some good examples in policy areas where we have seen bipartisanship. One of the things I'm really interested in is, of course, housing policy. And what we have seen over the course of the last decade is we've gone from saying there is this kind of this denial that there's even a problem to now essentially the across the two largest parties between Labour and National, they've kind of got a broad idea that we want to build more homes, we want to support infrastructure, we want to support density around transport corridors and nodes. And so we're seeing some good examples of specific areas where there is some support, but we also know there's some really big pushback from some of the political parties, and you might know who I'm talking about. A question from Anonymous. Should we means test superannuation? I know many rich people who really don't need it. They are more than happy to give it up. Really good question. And the answer is, if you look at Australia, they do means test it. And as a result, their superannuation payments are a lot less and it's much more affordable. So for those, right now, our policy is very much about universal access. So if you don't need your money and you're listening to this and you're receiving the super, there is a wonderful program called Share My Super. Um, I remember when I was talking to Liz when she started it, a fabulous program that says, if you don't need it, give it to us, and we'll put it to worthy causes that will help you help that money go to communities that need it and to initiatives that need it. So yes, I mean, in my mind, if we want to make New Zealand Super, which is actually excellent as a policy tool, but if we could make it affordable for the people who need it, it would be even better. For those of you who get super now who don't need it, there are some ways to give that money away, and Share My Super is one example of that. Question from Renato. What is the current tax paid for people getting payouts from KiwiSaver? There is no tax. So you pay all the tax on the way in and through. So because your KiwiSaver contributions are after tax, and then you pay tax on the returns, you would see the returns that you see on your KiwiSaver account is after tax and after fees. So there is no more taxes to be paid when you exit the fund. What could that look like in the future? My fear is that we will grow this big pie, and in 2 years' time, government will buy title tax. No, I don't think so. So I'm not clear that there is a really big risk of some kind of tax grab from KiwiSaver. I'll tell you what, if somebody tries it, I reckon that government is never going to get back in. You mess with people's own money at your peril. That would be a reach far too big for any government. So I'd be very, very surprised politically if they could carry that off. A question from Anonymous. Are there differences in access to funds by the government, KiwiSaver or not? Should you fall into financial strife? Thinking of MSD and the work of income and such. Difference in access to funds by the government. I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm sorry. So I'll pass that for now. With all the questions, I really feel Kiwis need to do more learning study for financial asset management. Property is only one of the many methods to accumulate wealth. Many of my friends required 40s and 50s. There are many approach and method to accumulate wealth. I come from Asia. Almost everyone invests in stock market or ETF to accumulate wealth. The importance is to keep learning. You can also do self-learning easily now online. Look, that's absolutely right. There's lots of really great resources. There are lots of really easy ways to invest. KiwiSaver has been, I think, one of those really good reasons why people have gotten into financial markets. It's been a great democratizer of financial savings in New Zealand. So it's been really, really good in that sense, but it shouldn't be your only thing. And I think that's what I've been trying to describe to you is, make sure you understand your overall goal and think about how you get there. There are lots of ways to get there. KiwiSaver is one part of it, but it should be in the wider kind of context and picture of saving for retirement. And you're absolutely right. There are lots of easily found resources online. Just make sure they're verified and reputable. I'm very wary of financial advice on social media and things like that. But also, if you are wealthier, if you have saved up enough money, it might really be worthwhile to get a good quality personalized financial advice because that will make sure that it is suitable for your personal situation. Near to the end. Okay, three more questions. I've heard it mentioned before that the money invested in all of KiwiSaver could be used to fund infrastructure and reduce the cost of super. With that in mind, why would you disincentivize people saving to this extent? Seems like two birds, one stone type of thing. The answer is absolutely yes. I cannot understand why any government would say that we're not going to encourage people to save for KiwiSaver and make it easier for the KiwiSaver funds to be part of the solution to investing in our infrastructure in New Zealand. I think it's pretty short-sighted thinking, but that's what we see in terms of public policy is politics is always about making trade-offs. And in this instance, they wanted to send the signal of increasing contributions, but didn't want to pay for it. If anything, they went the other way and said, we actually want to take some of the tax cuts we gave you last year away from you. So, look, I don't really understand why that is the case, but my very strong sense is that if you wanted to use KiwiSaver to your advantage, you could. KiwiSaver is already a substantial sum of money. Even at current trends, it's probably going to be $1 trillion in the next 50 years. That is a big lot of money we could be repurposing for a lot of good in both investing in businesses in New Zealand, but also in infrastructure in New Zealand if we wanted to, and of course to give people dignity and comfort in retirement. Great question. I wish everybody else thought like you did. Question from Speedy Bird. Bit of a shame that pensioners are seen by economists as a future economic burden rather than a group of people who have contributed their taxes towards the country for decades. Well, so let's break it down again. The reality is that the people who are pensioners today have never paid enough taxes for their pensions. The way that we works is that when I pay taxes today, I'm paying for the pensioner who's there today, but not for the pension that we will need in the future. Therein lies the problem. There's nothing wrong with old people. It's great that you're getting older. It's great that you have contributed. It's wonderful. But while you're working and contributing taxes, we also had a failure of politics and leadership in actually creating a pension system that was sustainable. What we have got instead is people go, I paid for people in the past, so other people should pay for me now. But the mathematics has changed. While there were lots of people to pay for fee pensioners when you were working, there is not enough workers to pay for the pensioners today. And therein lies the problem. It's not that I dislike old people at all. In fact, I think it's wonderful that we have more people living longer and better lives. That's exactly what we want. But if we're going to be mindless in our public policy that doesn't prepare us for a known future, because everybody gets older, we know this, then it's a really big problem. And I don't think we can shy away from saying, I did my bit and I paid my taxes. You didn't. You actually didn't. We did not pay enough taxes for the future liability of how much it would cost for your cohort. And therein lies the problem, right? So don't take it personally. It's not about you individually. I love you. The problem is much more that we have had a failure of public policy and politics that fails to deal with the underlying issue of fairness across generations. We are very happy to rob our children and grandchildren for our comfort. Last question. Yes. What are your thoughts on redistributing the government subsidy instead to beneficiaries if they contribute the minimum amount so they too can reap the benefit at retirement, as a result, reduce the burden and provide them with dignity? So the way it works is essentially if you're on welfare, you are in fact going to be better off once you move to super because super payments are a hell of a lot higher than welfare payments. So in reality, for people who are extremely poor, the current system of where our retirement system is actually really well set up for that. So their income will in fact improve as a result of retirement. The bigger issue is for all the other people on the right-hand side, the other top half of New Zealanders. If they're not saving, then they're the ones who are going to be worse off. So look, I don't think there's any reason to try and kind of, I guess, repurpose the subsidies for that group of people. But instead, I think what we should think about is how can we make our welfare payments sufficiently high that people have some dignity. So at the moment, our welfare payments are quite low and people are stuck in poverty, and that's probably a bigger challenge. So that's a really big question, and I don't think I can answer that quickly in this short period of time that we have. But the issue for people who are extremely poor is probably not around pensions. It's probably more on the poverty that they experience today, and how do we reduce the impact of the poverty that they're experiencing? Because in fact, for most of these people, retirement will be an improvement from where they are today. Look, thank you for the huge amount of questions that you've put through today. I know it's an issue that's close to all of your hearts. Thank you for joining me today. It's been always a pleasure to talk to our members. If you have any questions, comments, get in touch with our customer services team or give me an email. I'm at shamubeel.yaku@simplicity.kiwi. Thanks again for joining us. Ka kite.